The wind came early that autumn, sweeping down off the Absarokas with the bite of steel and snow on its breath. It combed the yellowing cottonwoods along the Yellowstone Bighorn confluence, rattling their dying leaves like small bones, whispering through the willow thickets that draped the river bends. Cold river scent silt, trout-slick stones, wet bark hung in the air. A fox barked once in the gray dawn, a flock of geese lifted in a ragged tier of wings. In that lonely stretch of land, where the world still belonged more to elk and buffalo than to fences or saints, Elias Carter drove a hand-hewn stake into the ground and studied it like scripture. He had been 6 winters with the crow, and the wind still spoke their tongue to him. His coat was of tanned elk hide, patched with sinew, the edges fur-wrapped for the mountain cold. His beard was streaked with ash and iron gray, hair tied back with a strip of otter hide. Under the jawline, where an Arikara lance had torn flesh 5 years before, ran a pale scar that glimmered ghost-white in morning light. He had watched men die along the Missouri and Powder, seen snow swallow forts and river ice drag whole bullboats beneath its skin. That scar was not the worst wound he carried. The worst one sat behind the eyes, where he stored the faces of trappers who never came back from the .23 fight, from fever, from winter, from their own folly. Now he meant to live quieter, he told himself, build a homestead, raise horses, hunt enough, trap enough, and speak seldom. The journals of Jedediah Smith had once passed through his hands. He remembered a line the man had spoken near the Tetons, "I go because I am called, not by men, but by the land." Elias had believed that once. He still believed, but now the voice had softened. It spoke of staying, not wandering, and staying meant a bridge. Below the slope he worked, a creek cut sharp across the trail, cold and fast even in low season, its bottom hidden by roiling green, a place the settlers had already named in the only poetry they trusted, Break Horse Crossing. They spoke of it with nervous laughter. Teams wrecked, men soaked and frozen, wagons half-eaten by mud before they could be pried loose. Where settlers cursed, Elias listened to the water. He crouched, watching driftwood spin in the current. The creek spoke its logic freely. Push here, rock foundation there, let logs bend or they break, brace with earth, bind with hide so the wood breathes and swells with rain, a woodpecker hammered. The river murmured. Elias nodded. Behind him, footsteps scuffed, then voices knew settlers from back east. Canvas hats, stiff coats, boots still too clean for this country. They paused, arms crossed, studying the lattice of peeled logs Elias had begun to lay at angles, their ends forced deep into earth like teeth. "Now what in blazes is that contraption?" one man snorted. Another spat. "Ain't no bundle of sticks gonna carry a man, far less a wagon." Elias didn't turn. "It will carry more than wagons," he said, voice calm as river mud settling. "It will carry storms." The men chuckled. "Savage engineering, that's what it is. Must have learned it from them. Injuns up north, crow ways, ain't it? Bending wood like a basket." They laughed harder. Elias simply pressed his palm against the timber. "The crow know rivers," he said. "They cross where others drown." "Yeah? Well, white men build bridges proper, nails, planks, square and straight." "Square breaks," Elias murmured. "Straight resists." "A thing that resists a river dies in spring thaw." They didn't understand. Most never did. The newcomers drifted away, shaking their heads, muttering that the wilderness had made him half-wild too. Elias let them go, let them believe timber only obeyed saw and nail. He had lived long enough to know trees remembered the wind, and if you listened gentle-like, they told you how to work with it. Through the afternoon he cut a notched lodgepole pine, binding crossbeams with buffalo rawhide that would shrink tight as iron when wet. He packed brush and willow wicker between beams, building a living spine that could flex with floodwater. Learned that from watching Crow women weave fish traps strong enough to hold a writhing river. When dusk settled, he lit a pitch-soaked lantern and worked by its glow. Light flickered along the curve of his scar, casting half his face in shadow. Sparks from his small fire snapped into the growing dark like trapped fireflies. He hummed an old crow chant, low and rhythmic, the one an elder named Walks with Snow had whispered during tough crossings. The water sees truth. Do not lie to it. Camp smoke mixed with the sharp tang of wet timber and elk-hide, coyotes yipped in the far breaks. The lantern flame trembled in the wind, but Elias's hands never stopped tightening lashings, smoothing bark, carving notches deep enough to guide strength, but not so deep as to wound the grain. Men back east built like they feared failure. Out here, you built like you expected the earth to tear half your works away. That was why the crow bent things instead of bracing them. Why they spoke to sinew, not iron. Night deepened. Stars pricked the sky. The river shimmered like hammered pewter. Bootsteps returned settlers again, drawn by curiosity or mockery, or that uneasy awareness a man feels when he watches someone touch a world he does not understand. They stood at the bank, whispering. One let out a laugh sharp as broken slate. "You talk to trees too, Elias?" another asked. Elias wiped sweat from his brow with the back of one sinewed hand. He did not look at them. "The woods teach," he said softly, as though speaking more to the current than the men behind him. "If a man listens." They scoffed, called him touched, called him half-savage, walked off into the dark, boots crunching frost-bitten reeds. Elias only knelt again, palm pressed to the cool, solid timber that would soon cradle wagons and men and all their doubt. Above him, a limb creaked in the wind like a prayer whispered by a world older than stone churches or government roads. Below him, the creek murmured secrets to anyone patient enough to hear. Elias Carter listened, and the timber listened back. Morning drifted cold from the mountains, pale and brittle as tin hammered thin. Frost silvered the tall grasses, and the cottonwoods clicked their last stubborn leaves in the breeze like old women whispering secrets to each other. The river rolled steady beneath a thin skin of steam, a living muscle of water and will. On its bank, Elias Carter sharpened his draw-knife with slow, decisive strokes, as though each pass honed not iron but focus itself. He had risen before light. Men who'd wintered in crow lodges learned that habit. Dawn was not invitation, but command. You rose when the fire sank low and the sky was still dreaming. You checked the horses before the frost bit them. You breathed deeply, slow, letting the land fill you before speech or hunger or doubt could. Behind him came voices again. "Thought you'd have sense by now, Elias. Shoulda left that wilderness witchcraft in crow country." 3 settlers this time, silhouettes against the rising sun. Scarves around their necks, wool coats heavy, muskets slung casual as pride across shoulders. One man, lean-faced and sharp as a fence staple, spat into the frost. Steam curled from his breath. "You buildin' that bridge for men?" he sneered. "Or spirits?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He wiped his blade, tested the edge against his thumb, and set to shaving bark from a new support beam smooth, even curls falling like wood-colored snow. When he finally spoke, his voice held no edge, no heat. "For whoever needs crossin'," he said. "Crossin'?" one man barked, laughing. "Ain't nobody asked you for that." Elias paused. The blade rested, still in his hand. Near his boots lay a length of raw sinew soaking in a copper basin, pale and strong as river muscle. "No one asks the river to flood neither," Elias murmured. "But it does. And men perish if they're not ready." A scoff. "River don't sign the land. We do. Civilization's comin'. You'll see. Real bridges, real roads, no place for superstition." Elias only nodded once, thoughtful, not agreeing. He had seen civilization. He had smelled it crowded along Street Louis levees, a stew of sweat and ale and horses and disappointment. He had heard it in army muskets cracking across the prairie and in the soft wails of crow mothers over children fallen to fever or bullets. Civilization did not always walk gentle. "Let 'em go," Elias said softly to himself as they walked off. "Mocking's easy when you've never felt a river take a friend." He saw it again then, unbidden, the dark surge of the Missouri in 23. Arikara arrows raining like angry. Stars, trappers splashing, shouting, hands clawing at mud, while rifles misfired in river spray. Men he'd shared whiskey with sinking in silence. Jedediah Smith himself, face carved by faith and hardship, kneeling on a slick riverbank afterward, whispering a psalm of gratitude for breath still in him. That memory followed Elias like a shadow. He resumed work, notching the beam with calculated precision. Every cut had purpose. Every lash of sinew remembered how crow poles held taut when wind became predator. He spoke low in crow tongue, voice barely a thread in the cold air. Awakspash ishish, the wood hears. Toward midday, a different set of steps approached. Light, uncertain, hesitant. "You really think it'll hold?" came a young voice. Elias turned. Amos Fletcher, barely 20, pale beard trying to sprout, coat patched more than his pride allowed him to admit. Not all settlers came with mockery. Some arrived with hunger for land, yes, but also for understanding. "It will," Elias said simply, "if built proper." Amos shifted. "The others say it ain't right. Says bridges need planks, square beams, nails." Elias smiled, faint and worn. "Those men never saw a river tear iron like bread dough. Wood wants to move. Bind it wrong, and it fights you. Bind it right, and it carries what no nail can." He guided the boy's hand to the timber, let him feel the grain. "Tree remembers wind," Elias whispered. "We bend with it or break." They worked together for a time, silence filling the space between tools and breath. Every so often Elias corrected Amos's grip or nodded approval when the young man learned quick. Clouds slid across the sun. Ravens passed overhead, dropping coarse cries like thrown stones. At dusk, Amos left for town. Elias remained, always remained. When darkness deepened, he lit his lantern again. Rawhide tightened in the cool night, creaking faintly like leather prayer. Smoke curled skyward from his fire pit, amber and pine sweet, spiraling into the cold. Coyotes sang. An owl spoke once, low and hungry. Alone, Elias knelt on the half-finished structure, palm laid flat upon damp logs. He whispered the Crow Elder's blessing, again, not for spirits, not to charm timber, but to remind himself of humility. Water tests truth, wood keeps secrets, a man listens or he falls. In the distance he heard chuckles from the road settlers watching his lantern flicker like a lone ember against a swallowing dark. He knew their laughter by sound now sharp, thin, afraid to admit curiosity. Elias didn't turn, didn't answer. When the last echo of boots faded, he whispered to the night, "The woods teach, if a man listens." Then he bent to his work again, patient as winter, steady as the river itself. Winter did not so much arrive on the upper Missouri as descend, like a wolf settling its jaws quietly around the frontier. It crept first in breath, thin and sharp, then in frost, feathering the river's banks, and finally in a silence so deep it pressed against a man's ribs. Snow came late, but when it came like judgment, heavy, wet, unending, smothering sage and willows, bending cottonwoods beneath its white command. Elias Carter worked through it all. He rose with frost in his beard, fingers stiff as carved bone, breath steaming like a bull elk's in rut. Some nights the lantern sputtered and wind clawed at the flame, threatening to drown it. Some mornings he woke to a world so still, even the river seemed to hold its breath. But each day he walked out to the bridge, his bridge tools slung along his belt, sinew bundled at his hip, resolve set deeper than the ice forming on the water's skin. The settlers passed less often now. Winter humbled even the proud, and laughter didn't carry as far when one's livestock starved or one's roof groaned under snow load. Still, when they came, they jeered through chattering teeth. "You see a wagon? Cross it yet, Carter? Looks like a beaver lodge more'n a bridge. Better to pray than to tie sticks like that." Elias ignored them. Mockery held no weight when you'd watched men freeze to death under clear skies, their last breath hanging in the air, longer than their warmth in the world. He'd buried trappers in snow pits, seen steamboat men drowned beneath spring ice floes, witnessed crow hunters build snow shelters in blizzards and survive what white engineers would never attempt. Winter was not a season, it was a judge. But river was sterner still. The first dream of thaw came early, a whisper of warm wind, a trickle under ice, a faint groan in the water's grip, as if the current turned in its frozen sleep. Elias felt the change before the settlers noticed it, felt it in the timber under his palms, in the subtle softening of sinew lashings, in the river's breath growing restless beneath its winter chains. He reinforced anchor beams, driving sharpened cottonwood stakes into the thaw-softening mud. He wrapped new rawhide across the frame, humming low a crow rhythm, slow as migration. He tested every join with a woodsman's intimacy, listening more than looking. Then came the thaw. It did not arrive politely. A warm Chinook wind swept down, and snow wept from the mountains in roaring white torrents. Ice cracked like rifle fire. The river woke like a caged animal loosed, heaving and snarling under the sudden freedom. Sheets of ice spun, collided, shattered, thundered downstream with the rage of winter unbound. Elias stood on the bank, breath held, watching as floes the size of wagons slammed against his unfinished bridge. Logs shuddered, lashings groaned like wounded oxen. Sediment rose in clouds beneath the torrent as the river tested every inch of his labor. Settlers gathered uphill, hats pulled down low, eyes wide. It'll go. No crossing stands in spring flood. He's mad if he thinks sticks hold against a mountains melt. Elias didn't speak. He only watched, jaw tight, one hand resting on a willow staff for balance against the trembling ground. The river clawed and howled, dragging entire trees downstream, snapping lesser brushworks, swallowing whole the makeshift footplank settlers had thrown together a mile east. But his timber lattice bent. It bowed, it groaned, but it did not surrender. Where the river shoved, the bridge yielded. Where the current bit, root-cradled logs gripped deeper. Water surged through brush-packed cribs, releasing force instead of fighting it. 3 times the onlookers gasped as an ice mass struck, and 3 times the structure flexed, hummed, and settled back like an old bull, refusing to kneel. Amos Fletcher stood nearest Elias, hands clenching and unclenching. "How did you know?" the boy whispered. "I didn't," Elias said. "I only listened." "To who?" He nodded toward the river. "To everything older than me." Behind them, silence thickened. Even the mockers quieted as a floe smashed clean through a settler's crude plank bridge further upstream, splitting it like kindling. Wood spun away. Men cursed. Elias's structure held steady, shaking off the blow like a great bear shrugging snow from its back. When finally the water calmed, ice drifting thinner, wind settling, sun glinting off broken floes like shards of some shattered heaven, the settlers stared down at the ragged remains of their crossing and at Elias's still-standing frame. One older man, cheeks leathered by prairie winds, spat into the mud, not in contempt but from habit, and muttered, "Luck." Elias did not correct him. Luck had little to do with it, respect did. Memory did. Rivers forgave no arrogance, and wood lied to no one who listened long enough. Night fell clear and bitter. Stars burned white and pitiless above the valley, and frost crept once more along willow branches. Elias walked the length of the bridge by lantern, running calloused hands over rawhide bands, feeling for weakness, giving thanks where strength stood. When he reached the midpoint, he paused and looked to the far bank, where the open land spread wide in silent future pastures, future trails, future graves. He breathed slow, lantern flickering against river mist. "Almost," he whispered to the timber. The bridge creaked back, as if acknowledging him. "Nearly ready." In the dark, with the settlers gone and the river gliding past like time itself, Elias Carter smiled not with pride, but with a quiet kind of reverence. Winter had tested him. Spring would soon demand more, but the river had spoken its verdict, and for now, Elias had earned its respect. Spring settled on the upper country not with warmth but with tension, like a bowstring drawn and waiting. The cottonwoods leafed in pale green fuzz, riverbanks throbbed with new mud, and meadowlarks stitched gold notes into the dawn. Yet under every birdsong was a warning. The land had had its rest. Now it meant to move again. Elias Carter felt it first in the horses. They grew restless as June crept in, ears twitching, nostrils flaring at scents only wild ones truly understood. His roan mare, Willowback, paced the upper pasture at night, tail lashing at nothing, listening to some far-off rumble beneath the earth. By midday the sky turned a hard, bright blue, one of those prairie skies where sound carries for miles. Elias was cinching a rawhide brace on the near bank when Willowback lifted her head sharply and snorted. Then he heard it. A tremor, almost polite at first, A heartbeat in the earth, then another, then many. He straightened. The air tasted of dust. Across the valley, the settlers were hurrying through chores, children chasing chickens, women shaking rugs, men patching roofs left ragged by thaw winds. None of them yet noticed the faint thunder under the grass. Elias did not shout first. He listened. He always listened. A hawk cut low. Across the meadow, wings stiff, crying once. The ground quivered again, and the tremor deepened, rolling like far-off thunder that could not decide whether to approach or withdraw. Then, on the far ridge, dust lifted in a long, trembling wall. Buffalo, hundreds, maybe more. Their backs dark as storm clouds, horns glinting like flint edges in the sun. Cows, bulls, calves clinging close, an entire season's migration pouring down from the Bighorn foothills. Elias's jaw tightened. Buffalo were no strangers here. He had ridden among crow hunters who spoke of them with reverence, not just hunger. He had slept beneath hides thick as winter dreams and thanked the animal each time he took one. A buffalo herd was life. But a buffalo stampede was weight enough to break the spine of any man's pride or bridge. A high, thin shriek cut across the pasture. A settler girl had seen the dust, then a boy, then shouts. Doors flung open, chickens burst skyward in confusion. A settler voice cracked, like a whip across the wind. Stampede! Get inside! Get inside! Men ran for rifles, though 1,000 rifles could not halt what thundered toward them. Women hauled children toward cabins. Cattle bellowed in panic, ropes snapping, hooves carving fear into mud. The ground quaked so violently the well rope beside Elias quivered. The herd split across the valley, a living river boiling brown and black, most angled west, but a breakaway line angled directly toward Breakhorse Crossing and toward the bridge. One settler, face red with panic, spun toward Elias and shouted over the growing roar, "Your fool bridge'll snap like twigs!" Elias didn't engage him. He didn't look away from the herd. The smell of earth ripped open. Dust and musk and raw force poured on the wind. Calves bleated, bulls bellowed, hooves hammered like 1,000 drums rolling across mountain stone. Amos Fletcher stumbled down the bank toward Elias, gasping. "What do we do?" Elias tightened his belt. "Brace what flexes, trust what holds." You're going on it?" Amos choked. Elias stepped forward, axe in hand, not to swing, but as a staff, as a signal, as a last promise to the wood he'd bound with his own hands and breath. He walked onto the bridge. The settlers stared, disbelief stark in their eyes. "Carter, get off there, it ain't worth." But Elias didn't move. He stood at the midpoint, legs braced, lantern hook still tied at his belt, though it was broad noon. His hand rested on a support beam. His eyes tracked the herd as one tracks a storm front one cannot outrun. Dust rolled over him, bitter and hot. Pebbles shook. The first buffalo broke into the creek bed, steam rising from their flanks like souls leaving their bodies. Behind them came the crushed dozens, scores, pounding toward the span. Elias spoke not in English but in Crow. "Hey Tapia, let the river guide." The world exploded in hooves. The first bull hit the bridge like a boulder, muscles rippling like river stone. The structure bent, not broke. Rawhide stretched and shrieked but held. Water splashed, foam flying white under black hooves. Then another buffalo. Another. And then the herd came in a roaring tide. Dust choked the air. Wood groaned like a whale in deep seas. Logs shuddered, but flexed. Mud surged from foundation pits and resettled as weight compressed it. Elias's hair, whipped in wind, kicked by sheer mass. The settlers watched in silent horror, waiting for collapse, but the bridge held. The buffalo poured over like floodwater, finding its natural path. Snorts, bellows, pounding earth, splashing creek, rawhide singing under strain. Elias stood unmoving, jaw tight, breath steady, one hand still on the beam, feeling strength and risk and faith all thrumming at once through timber. Minutes passed like lifetimes. Then the herd moved on, thundering toward the far hills, dust trailing behind like torn banners. Silence fell, broken only by the last faint hoofbeats fading into prairie distance. Elias stepped off the bridge, not triumphant, only steady. Settlers stared, wide-eyed, pale. One man swallowed hard. "That? weren't luck. Elias wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his forearm. Luck don't lash logs. No one laughed this time. In the trees a crow called once as though bearing witness. The bridge creaked under settling strain, then quieted. And from the dust-choked earth, from cattle still trembling in fear, from settlers humbled by what they'd seen, there was a rare and fragile silence. The silence that comes when men understand they've misjudged another soul. Elias said nothing more. He didn't need to. The land had spoken for him. The dust settled slowly, as though reluctant to let go of the awe it held. Fine gray clouds drifted through cottonwood limbs, catching sunlight in thin, trembling threads. The smell of trampled earth and hot animal musk clung heavy, mingling with river mist. Even the wind seemed stunned, waiting, listening. The buffalo herd had vanished into the far hills. Only hoofprints remained, punched deep into the mud like some ancient script the prairie wrote only once every few seasons. Elias Carter stood still at the river's edge, breathing hard yet calm, as if he had simply watched weather pass, instead of nature's fury hammer his work. Sweat traced his temples. Dust streaked his elk-hide coat. The axe at his side hung loosely in his hand, more prayer staff than weapon. His heart beat slow, steady like a man who had seen storms before and respected them, never feared them. Behind him, settlers began to move again, first in whispers, then in halting steps. Boots squelched in churned mud. Children's sobs quieted. Men let go of tools they'd clutched, like talismans against their own helplessness. No one was laughing now. Amos Fletcher approached first, face flushed, breath shaking. The boy glanced between the bridge and Elias, eyes wide, with the kind of respect young men rarely gave without being broken first. "I ain't. Never seen," he began, but words failed him. Elias simply nodded. His voice, when it came, was gravel-soft. "Power don't ask permission, only asks if you're ready." Amos swallowed. "And you were?" Elias did not answer. Readiness was not something a man claimed, it was something the earth decided for him. The settlers gathered at the bank like churchgoers unsure if they'd witnessed a miracle or a warning. One gray-haired farmer, hands shaking, removed his hat. Not in salute, just because awe loosened his grip. "That bridge," he murmured. "By God Almighty, it held." Elias ran a calloused hand along the rawhide lashings. Some were stretched, some cut by hooves, some frayed, but most remained tight strength renewed by the river's spray and the tension of their own purpose. The logs hummed under his touch, still vibrating faintly from the passage of so much living. "Wait." "It bent," Elias said softly, "so it didn't break." A stout woman with dishwater blonde hair wiped tears from her cheeks. "We thought you mad." "Maybe I am," Elias replied, neither offended nor boasting. "Why stay on it?" one man asked. "Why not run?" Elias looked at him the way a hunter looks at a man who's never slept outside a cabin in winter, without judgment, without praise. "A bridge don't hold on timber alone," he said. "Sometimes it holds on the faith of the one who built it." Silence followed. A meadowlark sang somewhere up valley, brave in the stillness after thunder. One of the harsher voices from before Barnaby Pike, thick-shouldered and red-faced, stepped forward, pride warring with disbelief. "That was nature runnin' wild," he muttered. "Ain't proof of nothin' but good fortune." Amos turned on him. "You saw what I saw." Pike scoffed. "I saw a fluke. Woods would. That contraption just got lucky." "Lucky don't hold 500 head of buffalo," Amos snapped. Pike sneered. "Ain't 500, maybe half." Elias lifted his hand, silencing them both without force, without anger. "Let the river judge," he said. Then he stepped onto the bridge once more, not to prove anything, but because he always did. Because work never ended just because someone watched you do it. His boots pressed muddy planks. The structure sighed under his weight, tired yet unbroken. Elias checked lashings, reset a bracing beam, wedged pine wedges deeper to tighten slats, fingers working with reverence, not haste. Men approached cautiously, testing the span with tentative boots. One ventured halfway, eyes darting as if expecting collapse. A second followed. Then a wagon approached, horses snorting nervously. "Think it'll take a team?" the driver asked, voice tight. Elias looked up. "Try gentle first." Boards creaked, ropes sang, the wagon rolled slow, front wheel dipping then, rising. The bridge flexed beneath the weight and held again. A murmur rose among the settlers, half disbelief, half praise. For the first time since the cottonwoods budded, no one mocked, heads nodded. Eyes softened. A woman whispered to her husband, "Maybe wilderness ain't foolish after all." Elias didn't smile. He didn't need to. Respect, like timber seasoning in sun, came slow and quiet. When the wagon reached the far side, Amos exhaled so hard he nearly stumbled. Pike scowled but said nothing, jaw working like a man chewing bitter bark. One settler finally asked the question, hanging in the warm air, "Who taught you all that?" Elias turned his gaze toward the distant mountains, where Crow lodges once dotted the river valleys and smoke curled from winter camps like threads to heaven. "Men who watched rivers longer'n this country's been dreamed of," he said. "Men who don't tell wood what to be, they ask it." He touched a beam, palm flat, like greeting. "An old friend." "Wood remembers wind," he murmured. "And a man lives longer if he remembers too." The settlers looked at him differently now, not as a strange trapper clinging to savage habits, but as a man who listened to truths older than fences, older than laws, older than pride. Children crept closer, eyes bright with awe. Men shifted awkwardly, unsure how to speak gratitude without giving up face. Women nodded solemn approval. Elias stepped down from the bridge, hand resting on the rail as though blessing it. "It ain't mine," he said quietly. "It's the land's, and the land will keep it if we treat it honest." No one argued. Not this time. A river breeze lifted, cottonwood leaves shimmered like silver coins. And somewhere far downwind, a single buffalo grunt echoed faint, as though the prairie itself had offered its rough blessing. For now the bridge stood, and so did Elias Carter. Summer thickened on the plains, heavy with heat, and that sweet, dangerous stillness that comes before sudden weather turns. Grass reached to a man's waist, cottonwoods hummed with cicadas. The river, swollen with pride from spring's victories, rolled slow and deep like an old bull resting between battles. And the bridge, Elias's bridge, stood firm as a promise. Travelers began to come, one wagon at a time. Trappers from the high country, fresh with bear grease in their hair and stories sharp as flint. Missionaries from the east, riding mules thin and determined, a pair of army scouts passing through, quiet-eyed and respectful. They each paused, marveling at the woven beams and the riverwood lattice that seemed grown, not made. Some settlers guided strangers across and patted the rails like they had carved them themselves. Others walked it slow, boots gliding over the smoothed logs, still half waiting for catastrophe that never came. And each crossing stitched Elias deeper into that land's story. Most folks nodded to him now. A few tipped hats, and some unable to swallow the truth that a quiet mountain man and Crow lessons outdid their eastern schooling, held bitterness like coals in their bellies, Barnaby Pike most of all. He watched Elias with a kind of tight-jawed hunger, as though the bridge had stolen something from him: respect, pride, authority. To men like Pike, being wrong was worse than being beaten. And each day the bridge stood was another day. Elias proved him small. Amos Fletcher worked alongside Elias often, learning to peel bark in long ribbons, to read the grain's patience, to bind a brace so it breathed rather than cracked. Sweat ran down the boy's back, but his grin was bright. "You build like you expect storms," Amos said once, wiping his brow. Elias handed him more rawhide. "On the frontier, expectant peace is the surest way to meet sorrow." Amos laughed softly. "Didn't reckon you for philosopher." Elias shrugged. "Winter teaches." He did not say that grief teaches more. Some lessons he held to himself, tucked behind a scar shaped like memory. The settlers held a small gathering that July food shared, on pine tables, children running wild, instruments creaking out tunes too soft to silence cicadas. A preacher offered blessing over the land, the homesteads, the bridge. Elias stood just outside the lantern light, accepting a cup of black coffee, but refusing stew until every child had eaten first. That was Crow habit too. He made no apology for it. When the preacher clasped Elias's hand and called the bridge a work of providence, Elias only replied, Providence leaves much to sweat and sinew. Laughter rippled. Friendly slaps found his shoulder. But through lantern haze, Pike watched from a barrel edge, jaw pulsing, knuckles white around a tin cup. Praise, when undeserved, swells a man. But praise delivered slow, hard-earned, only settled deeper into Elias's bones. He did not rise taller, but steadier. That night, under a sky swollen with stars, Elias sat alone by his fire. The flames licked pine sap and threw sparks like fireflies up through cottonwood leaves. The river murmured lullabies in the dark, and willow smoke curled around him like a memory of campfires in crow camps long gone. He murmured a prayer in crow, tongue soft, grateful, humble, not to gods of stone or steeple, but to the land itself, to water that tested men, to wood that bore weight without complaint, to friends long buried beneath mountain snow. The sound of a twig snapping broke his peace. Elias lifted his head, eyes sharpening. The wind carried the faint scent of liquor and spite. Another snap. Footsteps down by the bridge. He rose. No sudden motion, no panic, just quiet certainty as his hand closed around his axe haft. He moved like a cougar, silent, stepping around cottonwood roots, letting the river's voice mask him. There, bent low in moonlight, Barnaby Pike, blade in hand, cutting lashings, one by one. "Barnaby," Elias said, voice low, as river mud shifting. Pike jerked, nearly dropping his knife. Sweat glimmered on his brow. "Thought you'd be off sleepin'," he muttered, face tight. "You'll drown someone," Elias said. "Not accusation. Fact," Pike spat. "Ain't right. A man like you gettin' the town's thanks. This bridge, this land belongs to men who build it Christian and proper." Elias stepped closer. "River don't care your prayers, it cares your work." Pike lifted the knife, not to strike but to defend pride already wounded. "You think you're better than us, livin' with savages, talkin' like the woods whisper wisdom just to you." Elias shook his head, slow. "I think I'm just a man, but I listen. Listenin' don't build nothin'." His voice cracked. He sounded less angry now, more afraid. Afraid of being forgotten, of being ordinary. Elias reached and plucked the knife from Pike's trembling grip. Not rough, not cruel, just certain. "You ain't my enemy, Barnaby," he said. "Your pride is." Pike sagged like a horse whose spirit had been ridden too far. He stumbled back up the bank, shame clinging to him heavier than winter fur. Elias stayed. Through moon's arc and owl calls, he retied lashings, examined every brace, every knot Pike had touched. He worked until the horizon blushed pale. When morning light spilled over the plains, Amos found him there, eyes tired, hands raw, bridge safe. "You didn't beat him?" Amos whispered. Elias shook his head. "A man ain't worth beatin' when he's fightin' ghosts. Think he'll try again?" Elias looked toward the town, toward rising smoke from hearths waking to dawn. "No," he said, "shame burns hotter 'n anger. He'll heal or he won't. Either way, I'll tend the bridge." Amos stood quiet, absorbing that. As the sun broke clean over the ridge, Elias laid a palm against the timber, whispering, "Storms pass. Weakness passes too if a man lets go." And the river rolled on, carrying away the night's poison, leaving only the creaking promise of a bridge and a man who refused to answer hatred with anything but steadiness. Autumn crept back to the valley like an old friend, slow, confident, unhurried. The cottonwoods yellowed, then burned gold, then let go of their leaves one by one, as if every falling leaf were a whispered memory. Canada geese stitched the sky in long black arrows calling southward. The air sharpened, frost returned to fence posts and grass tips. The river, now calm after its wild seasons, slid dark and deliberate beneath Elias Carter's bridge. And through it all, Elias kept working. Not out of fear the bridge would fail, nor out of duty to the settlers who now depended on it, but because a man who listens to rivers never truly finishes anything he tends, he honors, he stays humble in the face of water and time. His hair had more silver, his scar felt deeper in the cold. The stiffness in his fingers, earned through winters too many to count, slowly crept toward his knuckles like frost claiming a window pane. Each dawn he tied rawhide, checked bracing, walked the length of the structure with a lantern in the dim light, murmuring to wood and water as though greeting family. Where other men saw a bridge, Elias saw a living thing: bone, sinew, breath, memory. Amos Fletcher saw it too. The boy, no, not a boy anymore, had grown broad-shouldered, sure-handed, eyes like the high country after snowmelt. He learned not only the craft, but the quiet that came with it. And now he stood beside Elias most mornings, splitting replacement stakes, bundling sinew, watching the water's moods. "You built more than timber here," Amos said one morning as ice-chunked water flashed silver beneath them. "You built a way to live." Elias chuckled softly, the sound rough as willow bark. "World don't need many talkers, needs watchers, needs men who know which way water bends and which way pride breaks." Amos's gaze drifted to the settlement in the distance, chimneys smoking, children running between cabins, a wagon approaching the crossing with creaking wheels, and a nervous team. "They know that now," Amos said. "Most of 'em." "Some do," Elias replied. "Some remember what they mocked, others only remember what they envy." Amos paused. "And Pike?" "Cross is quiet now," Elias answered. "That's enough." It was. In the West, forgiveness often wore the shape of silence. Winter whispered again, breathing frost into dawn. Elias's steps grew slower. His grip, once iron, now trembled when the cold bit deep. Amos began taking more weight of the work, checking knots, leading the mules that dragged new logs from the timberline. He listened well. Elias took pride in that. Until the morning, the river ran glass still, and Elias did not wake to tend it. Amos knocked softly on the cabin door, as he had every morning since the snows. Returned. No answer. The world outside held its breath. A crow called once from the cottonwoods, not the jeering cry settlers blamed for omen, but a solemn one, as if announcing to the river that something sacred had changed. Inside the cabin, Elias lay beneath a buffalo robe, face turned peaceful toward the window where pale light filtered through frost. Hands folded on his chest like a man resting after work well done. No struggle, no fear, no pain, just stillness. Like a river deep enough not to need to boast. Burned pine logs in the hearth had died to embers. His axe leaned against the wall, oiled and ready. His boots sat by the door, worn but mended, as though waiting for one more sunrise duty. Amos knelt beside him and bowed his head. "You listened," he whispered. "And now the woods are quieter for it." The town came, not all at once, but trickling like tributaries to a river. They entered with hats in hands, silent, awkward in grief they didn't know how to name. Some laid tobacco. Some laid river stones. The preacher murmured psalms. A crow hunter passing through laid an eagle feather. Barnaby Pike stood longest at the threshold, jaw tight, shame and gratitude and regret warring on his weathered face. He placed a rawhide strip on Elias's table and left without a word. No apology spoken, but none needed. They buried Elias beneath a cottonwood facing the river, where he could hear the water he had honored. Amos drove a stake at the grave head, not carved with scripture, but with river symbols, crow lines that meant journey, current, return. And the bridge? It held. Through that winter's ice, through spring's rage. Through wagon trains thick as locusts, travelers passing through spoke of a humble crossing built by a man who understood the language of wind in pine needles and ice cracking against banks. Traders called it Carter's Span. The crow called it something simpler, Ba Puashti Aksua, the bridge that bows but never breaks. Years later, Amos would build a second bridge downstream, wood cut from the same valley, sinew stretched the same way, prayers whispered to the same river. Settlers praised him. He always said the same thing: "I didn't build it. Elias taught me to listen, and the river did the rest." On quiet mornings, long after cabins turned to towns, long after rail lines hummed across plains, long after, men forgot how to read rivers. Travelers swore they heard faint humming when they crossed Carter's bridge, as if sinew still sang, as if cedar whispered gratitude, as if a mountain man's quiet prayer still drifted with the mist. A man may cross 1,000 rivers, but build one bridge for others, and he never truly leaves the water. and the river, ever faithful, rolled on, carrying memory, carrying time, carrying the echo of a man who, once upon a frontier, listened.